You might think I'm a terrible father for what I did. You might even call me deceitful, manipulative, or cruel. But I promise you, if you knew the full story, if you truly understood the depths of despair and the calculated risks I had to take, you would see why keeping a $35 million inheritance a secret from my own son was not just a choice, but a necessity that ultimately saved his life. An hour later, after the funeral, after everyone had gone home, I held that secret close, a heavy burden that felt like both a curse and a blessing. And thank God I stayed silent. Tell me honestly, would you have told him? Or would you have guarded that knowledge with everything you had, knowing it could destroy the very person you were trying to protect? It all began with the most profound loss of my life, the death of my wife, Eleanor. She was, in every sense of the word, my soulmate. We had built a beautiful life together, simple but rich in love, laughter, and shared dreams. We weren't wealthy by any stretch. I was a high school history teacher, and Eleanor was a beloved librarian. Our modest income allowed us to live comfortably, raise our son, Daniel, and save a little for a rainy day. Our greatest wealth was our family, and Eleanor was the bedrock of it all. Her sudden passing from a virulent, aggressive form of cancer left a gaping wound in our lives, a void that I still feel to this day. Daniel, our only child, was 22 at the time. He had always been a sensitive boy, deeply attached to his mother. Her death hit him hard, harder than I could have ever imagined. He withdrew, became sullen, and lost the spark that had always defined him. I tried to reach out, to comfort him, but my own grief was a tidal wave, and I felt I was drowning alongside him. Eleanor was always a private person, especially about her family history. She'd mention distant relatives now and then, a quirky aunt or a stern uncle, but never in great detail. I knew her parents had passed away when she was young, and she'd been raised by an older cousin. It was a life lived quietly, without fanfare. So, when the letter arrived a few weeks after the funeral, addressed to Eleanor, from a prestigious law firm in Switzerland, I was utterly baffled. My first thought was that it was a mistake, or perhaps some distant, minor estate. I opened it with Daniel by my side, hoping for some closure, perhaps a small token from a forgotten relative. What we found was anything but small. The letter, written in formal, precise language, informed Eleanor that she was the sole beneficiary of her estranged, immensely wealthy great-uncle's estate. This great-uncle, a reclusive industrialist, had passed away childless and had left everything to Eleanor, his only known living relative. The amount stated in the letter made my head spin. $35 million US dollars, $35 million. It felt like a cruel joke, a cosmic irony that such immense wealth would arrive just as the most precious thing in our lives had been taken away. Daniel, reading over my shoulder, saw the figure. For a fleeting second, his eyes lit up with a wild, almost manic excitement. Then, just as quickly, the grief returned, pulling him back into his darkness. He murmured something about it not mattering now that Mom was gone, and he shuffled back to his room, leaving me alone with the impossible reality of that letter. I spent the next few days in a daze, poring over the documents, verifying everything. It was real, every single cent. I contacted the law firm, spoke with the stern-faced Swiss lawyer, and confirmed the details. The funds were already in an escrow account, waiting to be transferred. I was Eleanor's executor, and the decision on how to proceed was now mine. But as I looked at Daniel, lost in his grief, barely eating, barely sleeping, his eyes bloodshot and haunted, a terrifying thought began to take root in my mind. Daniel had always been impulsive. As a teenager, he dabbled in gambling, getting into a fair bit of debt that Eleanor and I had quietly paid off. He'd also shown a tendency to get involved with the wrong crowd, drawn to their flashy lifestyles and reckless abandon. We'd worked so hard to steer him onto a stable path, to instill in him the values of hard work and self-reliance. But his mother's death had shattered him, leaving him vulnerable, a raw nerve exposed to the world. And now this unimaginable sum of money. I saw the path laid out before him, clear as day. The instant gratification, the escape from his pain, the allure of endless possibilities without effort. I pictured him falling back into old habits, worse habits, surrounded by people who would exploit his vulnerability and his newfound wealth. I saw him losing himself completely, spiraling out of control, believing money could fill the void in his heart, when in reality it would only deepen it. I imagined him squandering it all, ending up even more broken and alone than he was now. And the worst part, with that kind of money, the mistakes he could make would be irreversible, life-destroying. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became. Telling Daniel about the inheritance, in his current state, would be like handing a loaded gun to someone already teetering on the edge. It would be a catastrophe waiting to happen. It was a terrifying realization, a moral dilemma that gnawed at my conscience. How could I, his father, withhold such life-changing information? How could I keep a secret of this magnitude from my own son? But then, another thought struck me. How could I not asterisk? How could I knowingly place him in such peril? Eleanor wouldn't have wanted this. She would have wanted him safe, stable, and truly happy, not chasing fleeting pleasures that would ultimately lead to ruin. So that's the situation I was in, contemplating a secret that would fundamentally alter my relationship with my son, all in the name of protecting him. Before I tell you what I decided to do and the painstaking lengths I went to, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have entrusted your grieving, vulnerable son with millions, hoping he'd be responsible? Or would you have kept it hidden, risking his anger and resentment, to ensure his future? The decision was agonizing, but it was made. I would stay silent. I told the Swiss lawyers that I needed time to process the estate, citing my recent bereavement and the complexity of the inheritance. They were understanding and professional. I set up a discreet trust in Eleanor's name, ensuring that the funds were securely managed, invested wisely, and most importantly, completely hidden from public record and from Daniel. I used a separate financial advisor, one recommended by the Swiss firm, who understood the sensitive nature of the situation and maintained absolute confidentiality. I pored over investment reports, learned about financial instruments I never knew existed, and became a meticulous, albeit secret, custodian of this vast fortune. It was a full-time job on top of my teaching, a constant mental burden, but I saw it as my final act of love for Eleanor and my ongoing commitment to Daniel's true well-being. The years that followed were a tightrope walk. Daniel slowly began to heal from his mother's death, but his impulsive tendencies remained. He drifted between jobs, never quite settling, always looking for the easy way out. He got into minor scrapes, accumulated small debts, and even had a period where he moved into a shared apartment with a group of friends who were, to put it mildly, not the best influence. Each time he hit a bump, each time he expressed frustration about money or his lack of direction, I had to bite my tongue, to suppress the urge to tell him about the millions sitting untouched. It was excruciating. I wanted to help him, to alleviate his struggles, but I knew that simply handing him money would be a temporary fix at best, a guaranteed catalyst for disaster at worst. Instead, I offered him guidance, emotional support, and small, reasonable financial assistance, just enough to help him through a tough spot, never enough to make him complacent. I encouraged him to pursue his interests, to find meaningful work, and to build a life based on his own efforts, not on an accidental fortune. There was one particularly harrowing period. Daniel got involved in a get-rich quick scheme with a charismatic but clearly fraudulent individual. He invested a significant portion of his meager savings, hoping to triple his money overnight. He came to me, desperate, asking for a substantial loan to double down on his investment, convinced it was his ticket to freedom. My heart ached for him. It would have been so easy to just write him a check from Eleanor's trust, to make his problems disappear. But I remembered my resolve. I sat him down, talked him through the red flags, and gently but firmly refused to give him a large sum. Instead, I offered to help him get out of his existing, smaller debt, on the condition that he walked away from the scheme entirely and sought legitimate financial advice. He was furious at first, accused me of not trusting him, of not believing in him. It broke my heart to see his anger, but I held my ground. A few weeks later, the scheme collapsed, and the con artist disappeared, taking everyone's money. Daniel lost his savings, but he learned a painful, invaluable lesson. A lesson he would have never learned if he had $35 million cushioning his fall. He might have even been tempted to invest more, to lose more, believing he had an endless supply. That was the moment I truly understood the wisdom of my silence. Years passed, Daniel matured. He found a passion for woodworking, a skill he developed through sheer dedication. He started his own small business, working long hours, learning from his mistakes, and slowly building something he was truly proud of. He met a wonderful woman, Sarah, not my daughter, a different Sarah, who was kind, grounded, and shared his values. They got married, bought a modest home, and welcomed their first child, a beautiful little girl named Eleanor, after his mother. Daniel had become the man Eleanor and I had always hoped he would be. Responsible, resilient, and genuinely happy, not because of what he had, but because of who he was. It was on his 30th birthday, a few months after Lily, his daughter, was born, that I finally decided it was time. He had built his own empire, however small, through grit and determination. He understood the value of hard work, the pain of loss, and the joy of honest success. He was no longer the impulsive, vulnerable boy swayed by fleeting temptations. He was a man. I invited him and Sarah over, sat them down, and with a lump in my throat, I began to tell him the story of his mother's great uncle, the Swiss law firm, and the inheritance that had been waiting patiently all these years. I showed him the documents, the meticulously managed trust funds, the growth over the years. Daniel sat in stunned silence, then tears welled up in his eyes. He didn't erupt in anger, didn't accuse me of betrayal. Instead, he looked at me, his voice thick with emotion, and said, "Dad, you saved me. If I had known back then, I would have thrown it all away. I wasn't ready." Sarah, holding his hand, nodded, her eyes full of understanding. It was the moment I had feared and longed for, all at once. The truth was out, and it brought not resentment, but profound gratitude. We talked for hours, discussing how to use the inheritance responsibly, how to honor Eleanor's memory through philanthropic endeavors, and how to secure their family's future without losing the values they had cultivated. Daniel decided to establish a foundation in his mother's name, dedicated to supporting arts education and early cancer research, two causes Eleanor deeply cared about. He continued his woodworking business, finding even greater joy in his craft, knowing his financial security now allowed him to pursue it purely for passion, not just profit. Looking back, the weight of that secret was immense. the moral ambiguity a constant companion. But seeing Daniel now, the loving husband, the devoted father, the successful and grounded man, I know I made the right choice. He learned the hard lessons, built his character, and found his true path, unburdened by the corrosive influence of sudden, unearned wealth. That $35 million wasn't just money. It was a test, a responsibility, and a silent promise I made to Elinor. And I kept it. I know some might still disagree, might argue that honesty is always the best policy. But sometimes, love demands a different kind of truth, a different kind of protection. So, if you're a parent, or if you've ever had to make an impossible choice for someone you love, I hope you understand. Like this video if you believe I did the right thing to protect my son. Subscribe for more stories that challenge our perceptions of right and wrong, and share your final thoughts on this incredibly difficult decision in the comments section below. I'll see you all in the next story.